Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salamullahi alaykum. In the previous dars, we were taking a look at the Andalusi or the Umayyad Imara or Emirate al-Umayyah, the Umayyad kingdom of the Umayyad dynasty, which had expanded, and then following its expansion, how it had then eventually become derailed for disaster. We then saw how the problems intensified, and we kind of began to realize that this wasn't just an isolated incident. This was actually almost it was a part or a piece of the puzzle which was really reflecting the entire Muslim world. That's where we'll begin from today. The main themes we'll be looking at today is this understanding of that a miracle was needed, this concept of miracle and our belief in things like change, I suppose. And then understanding or learning about the new caliphate which emerges therefrom. So, now to just expand upon the objectives of today. So what we will first do is we will be kind of zooming out and back in once again. So we're going to continue from where we were. We're going to take a look at what the situation and the status quo was within Al-Andalus, the crown princes at the time, who they were or what issues they were facing. We're going to see and learn about a caliph that emerges by the name of Abd-ar-Rahman. Who was he and how he rises, a bit about him, his background. And we'll see as he takes this office, which is really to be and becomes the head of at least or what should be Al-Andalus, but happens to be at that time just Córdoba. And the type of changes he sets in motion, his amendments, his appointments, things like this, the strategy, the wisdom, that we will take a look at a country which is in chaos at the time, and we'll kind of go over some of those details again. And Abd-ar-Rahman III, or known as Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir, his attempt to restore calm, or his mission really to restore calm. We'll return to the character of Umar ibn Hafsun, aka Samuel, who was a major rebel at the time, and we spoke about him, somebody who was kind of really residing in South Andalusia, and then kind of rose with his own rebellion, and then really in a way, and we'll kind of learn a bit more about him and what he was kind of doing in other rival kingdoms at the time, whether that was the Christians in the north, and there were three at the time, the three different kingdoms, the kingdom of Leon, Navarre, and also Aragon, and things which start to happen around them. Also the other rebellions taking place within Al-Andalus. We'll then move on to see the success of Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir, and how this is such almost his success. Once it's set in motion, it's almost like a tsunami, and we'll kind of take a look at that, and it'll also reflect his character. And I do want us to kind of concentrate on his character as well, and his strategies really that he kind of deployed to attain the success that he did. We will then encounter almost a new phase, and we are really, in today's session, this is the 6th of what is to be 12 lectures, and we are halfway through. And really it is almost poetic in a way that we see, whilst we are halfway through our type of course, which is really just a summary and a glimpse and a glance over Andalusi history. But we can see from where Al-Andalus came, from where it began, with initially just Wadi Birbat or Gibraltar and the whole thing, to now, a few centuries in, we will enter a new phase, and this is known as that of the Khilafah. A Khilafah emerges, and the Khilafah is something completely different, and we will talk a bit about that, and perhaps it's more psychological than anything else, but we'll kind of take a look at that. And then we'll move on to post Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir, which is the era after him, his son Hakam II, and how, and really he is, in the true meaning of the word, his father's son, in the sense that how he deals with the situations in his time, but how he also adds to that grandeur which has been established. So, bi'idhnillah, let's do this. Alright, so let's go back to, first of all, the status quo. Now, we were taking a look at the era, the final era really of the Imara, which we had spoken about before, that the Umayyad dynasty had you could split it up into 3 different eras, and we were looking at the second era really, which was the era of weakness. Now, the thing is, it had different caliphs which took over after Abd-ar-Rahman II. There was Muhammad, then there was his 2 sons after him, Mundhir and Abdullah. The thing is that the wealth of the Muslims and the financial and economic situation had really kind of advanced and enhanced and become like amazingly well. There was tremendous amount of opulence. There was, people were enjoying resources. There was a surplus amount of food and stuff like this. So, but one of the problems these type of things bring with it is that they put people into a state of complacency, and they just want to indulge. There is nothing wrong with indulging, right? But you see, if indulging is seen as almost like an escapism, it could be great. It's something which you can use to rejuvenate and then shoot back into whatever it is that you want to achieve and do. But if it becomes the state that a person is in, that's when problems emerge. These people, by the way, these rulers, Muhammad, his son Mundhir, and his brother after him, Abdullah, were not necessarily bad people at all. They were actually, what historians have written about them, they were actually good people. They were people that were actually quite pious. So don't be fooled into thinking that these were people that kind of just totally gave into luxury, and maybe they were just always drunk and so on. And no, not at all. These people were actually quoted by historians as people who kind of would look out for the poor, who would feed people who were kind of who were punctual with their prayers, people who did have that love and concern. However, why the kingdom or the dynasty was really derailing was perhaps more that they were not leaders. You see, there is a difference. You see, leaders, they have something about them. They have a sense of charisma. They have a sense of leadership. Authority is something which, if a person was to walk into a room, they would assume it. It would not have to be something imposed upon the people. This is why it's not about being just a good person. We are reminded of the statement of the Don and legend of Medina, Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, who says that when being asked, why have you not taken hadith from so and so, and he is a good person, so Imam Malik says that I absolutely agree with what you are saying about him being a good person. He says, I would rather say that لو اؤتمن ببيت المال لكان به أمينا, that if he was somebody that was given the treasury of Baytul Mal, he would be trustworthy. Yet he says, لم نأخذ منه لأنه لم يكن من أهل هذا الشأن. He was not from the people of this skill and art. He was not from the people of this science. Meaning, it's not about people, it's not about someone being a good person. So these people were good, just to clarify that, because it is important. Then bringing back into perspective, if you remember, Umar ibn Hafsun, Samuel had kind of rebelled in the south of Al-Andalus. He had taken over several places, Jian, Ustujja, all of Granada, Malaga, all these type of southern regions he had taken over. He was being further supported by the Ubaydiyin or the Fatimiyyin, the Shia type of dynasty which had been set up in North Africa. They were obviously rivals with the Umayyi dynasty, and so what they were doing was supporting Umar ibn Hafsun. At the same time, he was receiving support from Seville, Ishbiliya, and the way that had actually happened was Abdullah, who was the last Caliph, had actually sent, because if you remember, we spoke about, and I'll remind you, there was his two sons. One was Mutarrif and the other was Muhammad, and Mutarrif had actually killed Muhammad to kind of take over, hopefully to become the next heir. But Abdullah had actually found out about what and realized what had happened and had him trialed, and then eventually he was actually given capital punishment in retaliation for what he had actually done. So he was a just person, he had other children as well, and amongst his other children, he had sent some of them to kind of try and deal with Samuel or Umar ibn Hafsun in the south. One of them was Ibrahim ibn, this wasn't his child, but one of his sons had taken with him somebody quite close to him by the name of Ibrahim ibn al-Hajjaj, who, although they had failed in their attempt to conquer the south where Umar ibn Hafsun was, they had attacked Ishbiliya, Seville, and were successful. But what happens is when Ibrahim ibn Hajjaj actually goes into Seville and kind of secures it, he then turns his back on the Caliph of Córdoba and declares his own independence. And then later on, what he starts to do, Ibn Hajjaj, is he starts to support Samuel in the south, and you've got a rebellion going on in the east, in Valencia. You've got some people declaring independence there. Zaragoza, Saragossa in the north is independent. That's in West Andalus. You had Abd-ar-Rahman ibn Jiliqi declaring his own independence. In the north, you had the Christian kingdoms, which were Leon, Aragon, which had emerged as well, and which we spoke about earlier on, and had made as its capital Barcelona. You had the kingdom of Navarre, which had emerged recently as well, and it was something which had become separate from Leon, and they had set their capital as Bambalona, and I mean that's how they write it in Arabic. I'm not sure about its contemporary or historic equivalent, which would be the modern day Basque region of Spain. They had begun to increase and intensify their raids and attacks upon the Muslim Spain, and they had reconquered certain cities like Salim in the north. This was going on when we took a look at the whole Muslim world. We began to see that the Ubaydiyin were in control in North Africa. We saw that Egypt and Sham, really, the Ikhshidiyin, Mosul, Bani Hamdan, Bahrain and Yamama was being ruled by the Qaramita, Asbahan by Bani Buway. We saw Kerman being ruled by Muhammad ibn Ilyas, and so on and so. Basically, the rule of the Abbasids had become so restricted, almost just to Baghdad. So the point is that help is not going to reach the Iberian Peninsula from without, okay, from the external Muslim world, because they seem to be in a great state of affairs themselves. So, I mean, there isn't really much hope from there. Now, returning to Al-Andalus, Abdullah ibn Muhammad, he dies in 300 Hijri. Now his real heir to the throne, direct heir that he had selected many years, many decades back, was Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who had already been killed by his brother Mutarrif. When he was killed 22 years earlier, he had a son. So this Muhammad who was killed did have a son who was only a few weeks old. Historians say perhaps about 3 to 4 weeks old at the time, whose name was Abd-ar-Rahman. Now 22 years later now, what's happening in the Iberian Peninsula is that nobody, now once Abdullah actually passes away, because the situation of Al-Andalus is so bad, ironically, unlike in most times when everybody is running for leadership and everybody wants the throne, and nobody wants to step forward. So this is almost an irony. People are in such a state of despondency and despair that they feel that there is no point us trying to go forward. Certain other people, members of the royal family, they feel that, look, we only rule Córdoba. The whole Iberian Peninsula is in such a mess. If I step forward, I'll have to kind of do something. And really, I don't believe I can. So just leave it alone. I'm happy with my little life. I mean, I've got a certain amount of opulence, certain amount of wealth. I'm living an affluent type of lifestyle. I'm happy with that. That's how members of the royal family were thinking. People and the public in general had also reached almost a state of despair. Many people amongst them, or at least a state of thinking that things cannot change. We are reminded in the Quran, وَلَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Allah reminds us that do not despair from the mercy of Allah. Allah says in another verse of the Quran, وَلَا تَيْأَسُوا مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ, and do not despair from the salvation or from the mercy, and also from Allah's help. Roh meaning here like a sense of almost like raha, and rahma meaning like a sense of comfort, and also something which comes and fixes the situation really. Do not despair. فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَيْأَسُ مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْقَوْمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. It is only those who disbelieve that despair of the mercy of Allah. Now, this said, we return to the situation. Before Abdullah actually passes away in 300 Hijri, he had himself undertaken the role of kind of like fathering. I mean, he was the grandfather to Abd-ar-Rahman, but he had undertaken the tarbiyah duties for his grandson. One of the things he ensured was that Abd-ar-Rahman receives a solid upbringing, something which is firmly rooted within Islamic tarbiyah, within the deen, something to bring up Abd-ar-Rahman in such a way that he has a correct aqidah. What I mean by a correct aqidah isn't a theological aqidah, by the way. I'm not talking about things like saying, what group or sect and things like this. I mean really how things make a difference. Believing that Allah is all powerful. That no matter how things look, there is always hope. Knowing that Allah looks out for His slaves. With that type of aqidah, with that type of understanding. Now, Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir is put forward to become in charge. At the time when he does, he is 22 years of age. 22. People today 22-year-olds. I mean, if we are to compare, just to have an understanding, in our day and age, somebody that's going to university, perhaps, you know, towards the end of his studies, or somebody who's just embarking upon a career or a job, or somebody who is still feels in our current climate, let's say they're still a bit too young for stuff like a family life, but they're no longer a child or anything, so they have entered manhood. But this type of mentality where people feel, oh, you don't need to take me so seriously, I'm still quite young, I'm only 22 years old, but yet at the same time I'm not exactly a child, so I have got some understanding and things like that. This is the type of mentality we generally have in our societies. At this age, he takes over such a chaotic kingdom, such chaos. Where is he meant to go? Who is he meant to speak to? Who is he meant to ask for help? What should he do? And remember, in situations of distress, in times of need and problems, we have to return to who? To Allah. And that is what Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir does. He turns to Allah. He doesn't turn people, nobody could help that situation. وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. And we'll speak a bit more about Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir's character in a moment. As he rises, one of the first things he starts to then do is restructure the organization or the organizational roles within Córdoba. He starts to do things like set certain people in place, he removes certain people, puts in people who he feels are more competent. He was very kind of merit driven in the sense of when he selected people. Córdoba is the largest at the time city in Al-Andalus. So it is, a reasonably large area because it includes its surrounding towns and villages. However, it is still less than perhaps 10% of Al-Andalus at the time. One of the most important strategies that Abd-ar-Rahman deploys really is gaining the trust and the love of the ulama. He has the utmost regard for people of knowledge. He starts to put them in positions of power, he starts to listen to them, he starts to encourage them to get involved. You will see this actually, and he does it, and he allows them to speak, he gives them power, he gives them control. He gets them to educate the masses. And this is, I'm not talking about years and years. This is just a matter of days and weeks into his new post. Later on, there is an incident when we'll speak about his type of cultural developments and how his construction of his palace and so on. But at that time, to give you an example, people, there is a famous scholar of Córdoba at the time by the name of Sa'id ibn Munzir al-Baluti, and he was the major khatib of Córdoba. And after Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir had finished this amazing palace, which is a bit later on, I mean, we've kind of fast forwarded a scene there or two. The thing is, when he finishes that palace and he attends the masjid, Sa'id ibn Munzir in his khutbah really kind of lays into the Caliph. And at that time, I'm skipping a bit, but I'm just trying to show you the character of Abd-ar-Rahman. And he really lays this is in front of the public. So without using his name, but he says those who are excessive in their spending and do this and do that, he really no holds barred, just absolutely going for it. So when Abd-ar-Rahman goes back to his palace, he actually says as well, he speaks to some of the people around him, And he says, Wallahi, he kind of addresses him, and he says لقد تعمدني سعيد بن منذر بخطبته اليوم. He says that he intended me by his thing, and he says Wallahi وقد أسرف في تقريعه, and he says that, and he overdid it, and in really criticizing me and trying to have such a go at me in front of people. And he says ولم يحسن السياسة. He says he wasn't diplomatic or strategic, and he says that Wallahi, he says وَتَزَعْزَعَ قَلْبِي, and he says he's shattered and broken my heart, right? And he says وَكَادَ بِعَصَاهُ يَقْرَعُنِي, because the khutbah, those who gave the sermon, would stand with a stick quite often, as it is in the Maliki madhab, and you'll see, or sometimes with a bow, and sometimes some places they use a sword as well, and I know it's many other madhabs as well. So he says he was so harsh, it was as though he was going to actually strike at me with his stick. So while saying this, somebody actually says to him that, he says, advises him that, why don't you just remove him? He says, اعزله واخلعه, like just remove him from his post, put somebody else there. And Abd-ar-Rahman turns to that person and he says to him, he says, Wallahi, he says, أمثل سعيد بن منذر في فضله وعلمه وخيره يعزل. He says, is somebody the likes of Sa'id ibn Munzir, with his knowledge, with his goodness, with his grace, is somebody like that removed? He says, لإرضاء نفس ناكبة عن الرشد. He says, only to satisfy a soul which is just so distanced from goodness. And he says, السالكة غير القصد, that such a self, just to kind of please a self, meaning himself, is kind of nafs, which has just gone away from guidance and gone away from sticking to the middle path, meaning because he's so extravagant in how he spent the money and things like this. And he says, Wallahi inni la astahyi min Allah. He says that I would kind of be embarrassed in front of Allah if I was not to have an opportunity like this and make it so that Sa'id ibn Munzir could be a shafi'ah, an intercessor, if he could intercede for me, on behalf of me, to Allah. He says, if I was to let an opportunity like that go to waste, I would be embarrassed the day I stand before Allah. That, people, is a leader. Somebody who has, you see, on one hand, he has huge wealth, but yet he has not forgotten his values, his morals, and his belief. But we'll come back to how he reaches such success. Coming back to now, so Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir, he starts to restructure places like Córdoba, the ministries, the top positions. He starts to bring the ulama close to him. He now looks at the country around him and sees that there's chaos in every corner. So he thinks, okay, where should I begin? Where should I begin? Should I go head westwards to deal with Ibn Jalliq, or should I go eastwards to Valencia, or the north to the Christians, or south to Ibn Hafsun? And then he thinks to himself, he comes to the understanding that first and foremost, what is first and foremostly important is that we deal with Umar ibn Hafsun. Despite the fact that he's beginning to emerge as a powerful person and a small, independent, almost territory, but other than that, he is also a murtad, somebody who had rejected al-Islam. So the cause against him was more clearer. It was one of clarity as far as Abd-ar-Rahman was concerned. So what he does is he gets his forces together, whatever he has, and he heads south. First of all, he goes to Ustujja. which, if you remember, since the time it was conquered by Musa ibn Nusayr, was one of the most fortified cities. And after laying siege to Ustujja, and they stay there for a little while, and they have their efforts, they actually take over Ustujja. And this is only 2 months into his new office. So 2 months of him being the Amir, he has retrieved Ustujja. You see, this is also a huge, it's not only a military or a type of political success, but this is also something by which he can restore the unity amongst the people of Córdoba, unifying their purpose. You see, if he was to focus on other people, it would be Muslim versus Muslim. It would be just, they would see it as people like Arabs versus Arabs, or Berber versus Berber, and it would once again allow certain cancerous elements to rise. Right now, there was unity of purpose, that these people are murtad and we are dealing with just them. He then heads further south. Right, he reaches Jiyan. He conquers Jiyan, although the struggle lasts for something like 2 to 3 months. There is a constant battle taking place, and the way cities worked in that day and age were that they had forts within forts, and they had forts and several forts surrounding cities and certain areas, and sometimes the whole thing came within a wall, and sometimes certain forts came within a wall, and once you got through that one, then you could get through the next, and so on. It was kind of all well fortified cities were. He conquers Jiyan. By doing so, he actually takes possession of up to 70 forts, which are referred to as qil'a in Arabic. 70 forts which belonged to Umar ibn Hafsun or Samuel, he now has in his possession, which are now annexed to the Umayyad dynasty of Córdoba. He now assesses the situation. Samuel, or as they call him, Umar ibn Hafsun, as his name was, his main sources of strength and backup, really, and reinforcements are from 3 directions. From the south, which was the Ubaydiyin, the Fatimid, the Shia type of dynasty in North Africa. It was from the north, the Christians, who were supporting Samuel as well. And they would kind of send sometimes reinforcements by ship and stuff like this along and come towards the south of the peninsula, and they would kind of reach him like that. And also from the west, from Seville, from Ibn al-Hajjaj. So here, what Abd-ar-Rahman does is he turns his attention to Seville. This becomes his first target. He reaches Seville, they surround it, there is a bit of a struggle, and Seville collapses to the hands of Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir. This is only the time now, really, the era is 301 Hijri. It has barely been a year since Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir has taken over. What he's done is he's not only restored certain territories to the Umayyad dynasty, but he's also cut off one of the main suppliers of reinforcements to Umar ibn Hafsun. Then he moves to other cities, Shaduna, which he conquers, Qarmuna, he conquers. He heads further south. He reaches Gibraltar, Jabal al-Tariq. This is a key vantage point. So what Abd-ar-Rahman does is he really focuses, and he goes in. And he goes in for the kill. And he goes in and he takes Gibraltar. The important thing of taking Gibraltar wasn't just because Gibraltar, it's another piece of territory. Because now he's also severed the supplies from the south. Because the supplies that came to Umar ibn Hafsun came from the south, from North Africa. So he's severed that channel now. So what he now has cut off two main channels, and also really impacted, he's also kind of severed the Christian north, because the Christian north would not usually bring their supplies to Umar ibn Hafsun by land. They used to send them by ship, which would come around the coastline and through to Gibraltar and South Spain, and from there they would give their supplies and reinforcements. So now that Gibraltar, Jabal al-Tariq, is also under the possession of Abd-ar-Rahman and al-Nasir, he seems to have severed all channels of reinforcements. At this stage, now the situation is looking a bit dim for Umar ibn Hafsun. So what Umar ibn Hafsun does is he calls out for a truce. Now, you have to remember, Abd-ar-Rahman is an extremely wise person, and we learn this from his character. He sees this opportunity and he seizes it. He takes the opportunity. He agrees to the truce with the condition that Umar ibn Hafsun hands over to him 162 of his forts, which were in different regions. Although Umar ibn Hafsun still possesses many more forts, and he still has a lot of territory under his control, but he gives up 162 forts to Abd-ar-Rahman, which are now under his control. So he kind of adds that to the Umayyad dynasty, in addition to places like Qarmuna and Jiyan and Ustudja and all those which he had conquered previously. Now, at this stage, really, Abd-ar-Rahman and Nasir is doing well, but he only has control over 1/6 of Al-Andalus. Andalus is torn into 6 different sections and fragments. You have West Andalus with Ibn al-Jalliq and his rebellion. You have Valencia, which is independent with its own rebellion. You have Zaragoza, which is Saragosta, where you have Bani Dhinnun with their rebellion. You have Toledo, which is independent. You have Umar ibn Hafsun in the south, and you have the Christians in the north. So although it's a good success that Abd-ar-Rahman has achieved, but it's not good enough yet. Meanwhile, what's taking place is the kingdom of Leon, which was in the northwest of Al-Andalus, seems to advance its raids further south. It attacks the west of Al-Andalus, which was under the rule of Ibn al-Jalliq, and it actually attempts to take over certain small towns and certain small villages and areas, and it enters into a type of battle stroke war with Ibn al-Jalliq, who had his own cry for independence. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir sees this opportunity, and what does he do? What does he do, people? And this is what shows us leadership. This is what shows us leadership. Because remember, this is a person still in his 20s. This is not a person of so much age and so on. Yet, look at his wisdom. He sees this opportunity. He gets an army as strong as he can, and he heads westwards. And he attacks the kingdom of Leon, which is attacking Ibn al-Jalliq. Now remember, Ibn al-Jalliq is also an adversary to Abd-ar-Rahman, because he's declared his own independence. But yet, Abd-ar-Rahman aids Ibn al-Jalliq's dynasty, his independence. He goes there and they fight against the kingdom of Leon. This battle and these fights for this small territory and land and the villages and towns and provinces which had been kind of swallowed up by the kingdom of Leon as it was advancing further south, it takes them up to 2 years, this battle does. So it's actually a war that's taking place. constant struggle in which in the end Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir is tremendously successful and a victor. He emerges victoriously. They achieve and obtain huge spoils of war. What does he do at this point? The Kingdom of Leon kind of retracts its steps back into what was more of a secure territory for them. It kind of gives up the land it had conquered from West Andalus, from Ibn Jalliq. What does Abd-ar-Rahman do at this stage? He gets his armies and he goes straight back to Córdoba. Allahu Akbar. Why does he do such a thing? Why not try and reconquer Western Andalus? Why not try and work on some cities or negotiate or say, look, say to Ibn Jalliq that, look, we helped you reconquer all this. How about we go 50-50 on this, or I take a third, or I take this, or I've spent. No. They take the spoils of war which they had conquered, as in just the treasure or whatever it is that they've got managed to get hold of, and it was a substantial amount, and they go straight back to Córdoba. This was almost like a silent slap in the face almost for Ibn Jalliq's dynasty. It was to remind them that people, we are not your enemies. We are not here for your blood. We are not here for your wealth. We have an enemy amongst us. We must remember our roots. We must remember this deen, this message. People in Western Andalus and in other places of Al-Andalus where this news had kind of spread to, it really shook them. Another thing that Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir was kind of aided by, really, which was really his own investment, was the ulama. The ulama reminded people that were with them that we are not here to snatch territory which belongs to other Muslims. So those people in their army that were saying, no, let's do this, or why did we not seize Western Andalus when we had an opportunity? The ulama reminded them, the khutaba reminded them, those people who preached reminded them. With such steps, you see very shortly after, and this is like 304 Hijri, you see very shortly after, places like Zaragoza, what they do is they offer their ta'ah. They say, we'd like to be part of, and we accept, we give you a sama' wa ta'ah, which is we give our pledge of allegiance and obedience. So you start to see people becoming drawn and attracted to this rule. This type of, this method which really reflects the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. In the year 306 Hijri, Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir is aided by another divine act of divine intervention, where Umar ibn Hafsun dies at the age of 66, and according to many, upon Christianity. His rebellion had lasted for 47 years. He had gained huge momentum. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir hears of this and seizes the opportunity. He gets his armies and he heads straight south. He goes south. He attacks, and he first of all gives his... you see, what Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir would do is he would always say to people that wherever he went, that look, if you are prepared to cooperate, you can keep your kingdom, you can even stay in rule. It wasn't that he was after their throne or their chair, but you will be under the Umayyad or the rule of Córdoba. And you can keep your wealth, you can keep your palaces, you can keep your position. We have no problem with that. And he offers that to the people of the south as well. Umar ibn Hafsun, they say his daughter was one of the people that actually led the campaign against Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir, and she would constantly kind of incite the masses around her to stand firm to their Christianity and to not listen to what Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir has to say. And they did. They did go to war, and it lasted for a short while. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir was successful. The people of Umar ibn Hafsun's type of territory had kind of, they asked for a truce, and Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir gave them that. And then even some of his children and his Ibn Hafsun's children and family members, they asked to be in charge, and he lets them. He doesn't say, oh no, I fear that you might do this. He actually lets them stay in charge. And he accepts the truce. And there are some negotiations, and they do that. Meanwhile, in the north of Córdoba, Toledo shortly after falls to Abd-ar-Rahman. Now, really at this time, the Christian kingdoms in the north see a lot of what is going on. So they actually begin to merge their strength. You see, the kingdom of Leon and Navarre actually make an allegiance. So you have this king, in Arabic they write his name as Ordino, and from Navarre as this king by the name of Shanja. Now they actually join together to kind of merge their strength and then to unleash attacks upon certain Muslim territories and things like that. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir is aware of this, and what he does is he gets his armies together. He sees what the kingdoms are doing in the north. He gets as much strength as he can, and he launches a campaign north. In 308 Hijri, there is a spectacular type of battle which takes place known as Ghazwa Mubish or Mobish, which is against the two kingdoms of Navarre and Leon, and Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir achieves a huge success in it. But he doesn't stop there. He continues to head north. He gets together another campaign, following shortly after, sends that further north. The kingdom of Navarre, their capital was a place called Bambalona, and one of the things he does is he recaptures Bambalona. So the kingdom of Navarre has become extremely weakened. The alliance, the allegiance that they had formed deconstructs. It's every kingdom and every king for himself. As far as they're concerned, they slightly retreat into what was for them safer territory. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir now focuses his attention and strength on the east and west of Al-Andalus. Beginning with the east, he heads to Valencia and places like that. Many places kind of give in to him, and other places he had to try and stand their grounds. And there are some battles with which Abd-ar-Rahman is met with huge success. He then heads westwards to Ibn Jalik's small independent dynasty. Once again, the people, you have to remember, it's not just about why he starts to all of a sudden get such sweeping success. It's that the people have now seen how he has behaved. Your actions, your type of characteristics and akhlaq will precede you. As the poet says, وَمَهْمَا تَكُنْ عِنْدِ امْرِئٍ مِّنْ خَلِيقَةٍ وَإِنْ خَالَهَا تَخْفَى عَلَى النَّاسِ تُعْلَمُ. And whatever a person has of characteristics, even if he thinks he can hide them from people, he cannot. So these things, they've reached people. So people, they start to give in. He seems to have a lot of public support, even if the political powers are against him, but the public seem to kind of like him. He has a huge sweeping success over Western Andalus as well. At this stage, Allahu Akbar, the entire Iberian Peninsula has become united. It has all come under the rule of Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir. At this stage, what Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir does is he takes a look at the world around him. He notices that the Fatimiyin in North Africa and in Egypt and so on had declared themselves to be Amirul Mu'mineen, as in the Khulafa. They had declared themselves to be the Khalifa. They had declared that they have got their rule. He looks at all the torn, fragmented type of regions of the Muslim world. He looks at Sham, he looks at Hijaz, he looks at areas like I mentioned before, Khurasan. He looks at Abbasid rule. At the time, the last Abbas, or not the last, sorry, in his time, one of the Abbasi rulers, Khalifa al-Muqtadir Billah, is assassinated by al-Muzaffar al-Turki, and then he's kind of has in his place, just put as almost like a pseudo type of ruler, is al-Qadir Billah, who really has no control, and these people are running the show from the background. And he's aware of all of this, and he sees what the Fatimiyin are doing in North Africa, and he thinks, wait a minute, نحن أحق بهذا منهم. We are more deserving of this affair than them. And then people, in 316 Hijri, Allahu Akbar, history is made. Abd-ar-Rahman declares Khilafah. He declares himself to be the Khalif of the Muslim Ummah. This is a huge shift of psychology. The Muslim Ummah, the power, the grandeur, the real strength had always lied in the East. For the first time, the tables had actually turned. The power had been shifted. The title, the spotlight, had now turned to Córdoba. Córdoba, by the claim of Abd-ar-Rahman, was now the focus of the Muslim world. This era, this what is known as Al-Khilafah Al-Umayyah, lasts from 316 to 400 Hijri. It is an extension of the Emirate Al-Umayyah, the Umayyi dynasty, which had been set up since Abd-ar-Rahman III in 138. It is an extension of that, but this is a new era. Why? This is not just one of rule and just power and territory. This is an era of grandeur. It's an era of regal, of royal protocol. This is an era which sets about a culture of its own. You start to see how this has an impact not only upon the psychology of the Khulafa there, but of the people who are around them. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir does not stop his campaigns. In 319 Hijri, he consolidates his control over Gibraltar. From Gibraltar, he heads further south, crosses the sea into North Africa. Allahu Akbar. He seizes control of Sabta, which is Sweta, and Tanja. These two key ports are now under Umayyi control. From here, he also uses this as a key position to support the Sunni uprising within North Africa, because a lot of the Sunni ulama were being persecuted. So he kind of uses that as a position to kind of send support to them. Whilst this is going on and Abd-ar-Rahman is establishing really his kingdom, And he really is, and then he begins to invest in the agricultural development, the cultural development, the actual in establishing cities and administration, and we'll speak about that shortly. Several years begin to pass by now. In the year 323 Hijri, we have an incident where Zaragoza, there is a ruler from the Muhammad ibn Hisham at-Tajibi who makes an allegiance with Romero II, or a king of Leon, who's a Christian king, to rebel against Abd-ar-Rahman. So he's actually making an allegiance with who? With the Christian kingdom of Leon against who is now the Khalifa, Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir immediately assembles an army. They head to Zaragoza. They head there. There are several forts. One of the first and most fortified forts they come across, they kind of really just engulf it with the onslaught. They conquer the fort. He has several of the leaders of that fort brought into what is within reach of sight really for the people of Zaragoza, and has them executed to show that this is unacceptable and that we are coming for you. At the sight of this, Muhammad ibn Hisham actually submits and sends out a type of a plea to surrender and says that, look, I'm sorry, I've made such a mistake. I totally should not have done what I did. It was absolutely out of order, and I've asked for your forgiveness and so on. How does Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir respond? He responds by actually accepting his plea. Secondly, saying that's not a problem, leaving Muhammad ibn Hisham at-Tajibi in control of Zaragoza. People, how do you think that impacted the tribe, that ruling type of class of the Tajibiyin of Zaragoza? What were they expecting? You see, they had just made an allegiance with King Romero II of the Kingdom of Leon against Abd-ar-Rahman. Now that they fall and crumble, what were they anticipating? Allahu Akbar. As though we are reminded of Fathu Makkah as the Prophet ﷺ enters, and yet he lets them go. He said, "Idhabu antum at-tulaqa." Go, that you are free. La tathriba alaykum al-yawm. This act was not just something like, it really snatches the hearts of people. This rule was a rule of heart and mind. It had conquered the hearts and the minds of the people. أحسن إلى الناس تستعبد قلوبهم فلطالما استعبد الإنسان إحسانه. That be kind to people, you will conquer their hearts. That this is a trend we have seen in time, that kindness conquers the heart. At this stage, now what Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir does is he has this focus on his kingdom. He also sees the kingdom of Aragon, which is once again in the Christian northeast. It was beyond Zaragoza, and he thinks this is an opportunity to launch an attack there. And that's what he does. He launches a campaign. He reconquers Barcelona, adds it to the Umayyad Caliphate, returns to Córdoba, and once again becomes involved in different more citizenry type of issues and affairs which were awaiting him. In the following 2 years, there are some problems which emerge in the Kingdom of Leon. Now, what happens is Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir assembles an army, a very large army, an army that is 100,000 strong, and they head off to meet the kingdom of Leon. This place which is known as, or referred to as, the Battle of the Khandaq or the Samura, in which, subhanallah, people say that Abd-ar-Rahman and his army were perhaps kind of misled by their number, as in, we are so strong. And really, although that is a mistake, there is no bashar who is free from mistake. Right? No human, kullu bani Adam khata. And really, kafa bil mar'i nublan an tu'adda ma'ayibu. Right? That's really that who is, it is enough for a person that if somebody could just count out his mistakes. So the thing is here, the historians do say there were some mistakes on behalf of Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir and his army in terms of what they thought of themselves, and they are met with huge losses, huge. The historians write that almost half of the Muslim army fell as prisoners of war or were either killed in battle. Allahu Akbar. Wa yawma Hunainin idh a'jabatkum kathratukum falam tughni ankum shay'an wa daqat alaykum al-ardu bima rahabat. Allahu Akbar. And Allah says, and the day of Hunain, when your numbers impressed you, but they did not avail anything, and the vast earth in front of you became so tight and narrow for you. And who can tell us that history does not repeat itself? Here there are also some lessons to learn. That Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir kind of retreats, goes back to Córdoba. He is reminded of his loss, but at the same time he does not despair. وَلَا تَيْأَسُوا مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ. So what he does is he once again starts to focus, he constructs, he tries to learn from certain strategic mistakes, he reinvests in the army, reinvests in the infrastructure of the state. After almost a year and a half, up to 2 years, he once again begins this campaign northwards towards the Christian kingdom. And this campaign goes on for over 5 years. Different places, military, strategic attacks, sustained efforts, deployed with wisdom. It brings the 3 kingdoms to crumbling to their knees. Leon, Nabar, and Aragon. All 3 accept that they make a plea for a truce, that if Abd-ar-Rahman will just stop, they are prepared to pay the jizya. And yu'tul jizyata an yadin wa hum saghirun. That they give jizya from their hand. Wa hum saghir, that they are in a state of, that they are in a type of almost a psychologically denigrated state. That is how, that they feel so belittled psychologically in a way. Now, that they recognize their place and that they give the jizya. And all 3 kingdoms prepared are happy to give jizya, and they continue to do so. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir then concentrates on the cultural developments. He begins to organize ministries. What he begins to introduce are, like, he departmentalizes things. So this person's in charge of all of these, and they have to now report to this person, and all of these people have to collectively basically he sets up what are like line managers and things like this within his government and within different ministries. He also makes Madinatul Zahara. People, this was a place that he made. People say this was a paradise on earth that he constructed. He constructs this city not too far from Córdoba. Some people say almost for one of his wives, but this city he constructs, it has layered type of settlements to it. It has certain like layer in a way that, because he invites people to live in there, to move into this, but there's certain layers to it, as in there's the general people, general public, and then as you kind of move into another layer, there's those people who work in an official capacity and a federal type of region, and as you move towards the center, there's the palace of Abd-ar-Rahman. And he invests so much money. It is documented that the palace had things like the walls and several things within it plated with pure gold. He's not restricting his investment just to his own palace and this Medina to Zahra. Córdoba at the time, they say, had a population of 500,000 people. It was in its time documented as the second largest city to known civilizations. The first being Baghdad, which had over 1 million, between 1 to 2 million people living there. They say Córdoba in its time had 13,000 almost like villas, which they refer to as dars. And they were, by villa, they mean something with a spacious garden and really large surrounding areas, 13,000 of them. It had over 3,000 masjids. He begins to invest in constructing or expanding heavily upon Jami' Córdoba, the Masjid of Córdoba. He has it expanded to 1,000 pillars. It becomes the largest masjid in the entire Muslim world. They say the mihrab he has built is built out of one large stone of marble, which he has imported from Italy in his day and age. He has several zoos set up, bird houses. He was a huge fan of these type of things. He invests in the navy. In his time, he has up to 200 ships made. He invests heavily in agriculture, having several fruits, exotic fruits, brought and planted within Al-Andalus. In fact, to the extent that they become so common within the peninsula. There is a surplus of fruits. Irrigation is heavily invested in. How to actually bring water up using like natural type of almost pumping systems, where they built it in certain ways, and you can research this online. He has the cotton type of industry almost set up. He starts to invest in extracting raw materials like gold, like precious metals and minerals from the earth. Gold, silver, copper, bronze. He starts to work on extracting these type of things. Medicine. He invests in doctors. He actually has several doctors imported to kind of teach and set up medical institutes. He has markets constructed. Markets being specialist markets. So now all of a sudden this is just the jewelry quarter. This is just the meat quarter. This is just the clothes quarter. This is just, he kind of departmentalizes markets. He has the police restructured and organized, that there is a different police for the day, a different police for the nights. He has shifts organized. There is a different police which supervise the marketplace. There is a different police which oversee the sea, or the seas and things like that, or the coast. There are different. He begins to introduce structure and organization. The postal department becomes incredibly impressive in his time, investing more in there. He sets up the Madhalim court, and the Madhalim courts are like what we have nowadays, the courts of appeal in a way, but which could be nowadays, I mean, depending on the country, it would vary, but eventually the Madhalim court would get back to the Khalifa himself. He invests heavily in knowledge. The library of Córdoba in his time, has up to 400,000 books, people. And remember, this is a time when there is no printing press. These books are being written. He creates new occupations, that of a scribe. Okay, scribes are something very, like, although scribes existed before, but the demand which such a culture now places for scribes gives birth to a whole new career which is really taking the public by storm. Now, he also introduces in his time a new career of bahithun, these researchers who work in these libraries, who will do things like, so if I'm writing a book on, let's say, fiqh or hadith, and I want some research done, but I've got to do my own work. Nowadays, I suppose, thank God for Google, but in that day and age, what you'd do is go to one of these bahith and you'd say, listen, I need this tahqiq done on this particular hadith, and if you get back to me, who knows these 400,000 books and so on, because he works in the library, that's what the person would do, and you would pay him accordingly. So these researchers were kind of set up. People, the kingdom, the Khilafah had really reached a new height. You start to see ambassadors appearing at the doorstep of Abd-ar-Rahman and al-Nasir from all over Europe. Germany, what would have been Germany, sends their, Almania they call in Arabic, sends their ambassador. France sends its ambassador. England sends its ambassador. The Byzantium Empire sends its ambassador. They recognize Al-Andalus to have become the most powerful state in Europe, if not in the entire known world and civilization of its time. And I'm not just making these things up. These things were documented. In fact, the King of England at the time writes a letter to him and sends 4 people with the ambassador saying, will you kindly accept these 4 people that I've sent to kind of study under, will you provide them almost a scholarship in your type of academic libraries and things like this, so they can learn these sciences. And he sends 4 people, and he actually signs off the letter with, he ends up by saying, khadimukum wa muti'ukum, that your servant and your obedient Maliku Inglaterra, the King of England. This is the heights at which the kingdom or the Khilafah of Córdoba had reached. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Nasir, he passes away in 300 Hijri. They say of his, that after he had passed away, people, when they went through his stuff, they found certain things like a diary which he had kept for himself, and they read through it, and he had an interesting section in his diaries. He had certain where he'd made certain notes and written certain things, but there was a section which he used to keep for, this was during his reign, which he had said, in Arabic he said, al-ayyam allati safatli, that those days which were totally problem free for me. And he says, like, fi yomi kada kada, he always says, safali yomu kada kada, wa safali yomu kada. Such a day was totally problem free for me. There were no problems in the state. There were no problems. I mean, there were no problems that I was dealing with. There was no. And he goes through and he lists these days on different days throughout his reign. And then the people, they counted these to find them to be just 14 days. Allahu Akbar. Such were people. Such were people. He is succeeded by his son Hakam, who ruled from 350 to 366. Now the thing is, Hakam was truly his father's son. When he comes into power, he is over 40 years of age. He is somebody who is referred to as Ashikul Ilm wa Ashikul Kutub. They say he was a total lover of of knowledge and of science. They say that he highly invests in the libraries of Córdoba, which become known as Maktaba al-Umayyah. He has books imported, like rare books imported from all over the globe, including like books all the way from Isfahan, like Raghib al-Asfahani's book on Al-Aghani. He has other hadith. Anything he hears of, he has it brought. He has ulama imported. He invests in the construction of paper. The quality of paper becomes so good in his time that they say many of the priests of Europe brought paper from his dynasty just to so they could write the Bible upon it, because it was of such good quality. During his time, because the whole knowledge thing has risen so high, what you start to see is there's a huge need for scribes. Now, obviously, men are busy with their agricultural work and so on, and this becomes a huge career opportunity for women. Women begin to take the lead in becoming scribes. In fact, it becomes known that, and you mean that so many, waves and waves of type of scribes, really. I don't mean just like a few people here and there. It becomes the trend. The Andalusi women become known for their amazing calligraphy of the time. This is during the rule of Hakam II, Hakam ibn Abd-ar-Rahman and al-Nasir. The Khilafah of Al-Andalus goes from strength to strength. He begins to set up free institutes for education. So people who cannot pay a teacher to teach their children, Hakam has set up certain institutes where they are just teachers who are just teaching, and anybody could go there. In his time, you see, normally what ulama were doing is they were teaching and then they would go away and do their normal work. So a scholar is working, but he happens to be a judge. A scholar is working, but he happens to work in the field as well, and he teaches on the side. What Hakam does is has these ulama salaried just to teach and research. They say during his reign that the literacy rate was 100% in Al-Andalus. With all this going on, Allahu Akbar, people see that Hakam is so engulfed with his love for ilm and academia. Has he lost his strength to stand his ground? With this, the northern kingdoms, the Christian kingdoms, unleash an attack. Allahu Akbar. The poem, Rahegi yaad hame uski khush mazaki bhi, mila hai jab bhi wo khush fahmiyon mein dal gaya. That we shall forever remember that person's kind of his humorous type of personality, or his light personality and characteristics, that whenever we met him, he always kind of deceived us by giving us kind of like false hopes. Now, the kingdoms in the north think that this person is a man who loves ilm and academia. He is not a person of the battlefield. Let us unleash our attacks, and that's what they do. But what they find, Allahu Akbar, what they find is a man who is truly his father's son. Hakam ibn Abd-ar-Rahman assembles the armies and heads north and shows them the true embodiment of the hadith that the Prophet said, وَلَا تَتَمَنُّوا لِقَاءَ الْعَدُوِ. Do not desire wanting to meet the enemy. وَلَكِنْ إِذَا لَقِيتُمُوهُمْ. But if you do meet them, فَاثْبُتُوا. Then stand your ground. And he stands his ground and then launches a retaliatory, like an attack in retaliation further north, conquering certain northern territories which belonged to the Christians, to kind of teach them that what you are embarking upon is a huge mistake. He also launches several attacks further south into North Africa, because if you remember, Sabta and Tanja were already under the Khilafah Umayyah. He launches certain further attacks into North Africa, bringing some of that territory also into Umayyad control and Khilafah. Allahu Akbar, people. Today we have truly seen a time where the Muslims have now risen to such strength. It was not so long ago that we were thinking and we were talking and learning about everything having crumbled and fallen to such a destitute state that no prince was prepared to step forward to kind of attempt to turn things around. Nobody was even prepared to do that, if you remember. And now you have ambassadors upon ambassadors showering the Khulafa with gifts. Allahu Akbar. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامِ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And those days we rotate them amongst people. Today we have seen Muslims rise to their glory. I think for now, let us stop with that. Let us kind of take a step back, inshallah, now from this session, knowing or having now witnessed these historic events and learnt about them, and leaving what fate has to bring in the morrow for the future. As the poet says, هي المقادير فلمها أو فذر إن كنت أخطأت فما أخطأ القدر. That such is fate, whether you like it or don't, that regardless of whether you reach your target, fate will inevitably always have its way in the end. We will perhaps see some turbulent times to come. We will perhaps see yet the rise of much crisis and chaos. Before now, with the grace of Allah, where we are, the Iberian Peninsula has reached a peak of success. So let us stop with that. Till next session, kindly do remember me in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.